Alright, YouTube, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII, and we are once again discussing the boy Vincent Valentine. And this is the video I mentioned with our last Vincent-related video that I initially wanted to do. It was an initial video idea, but then the last Vincent video kind of spun off into its own thing. And I wanted to discuss Vincent's limit breaks when it comes to the future of FF7 Remake, but specifically I want to talk about maybe the lore behind them. And what kind of kickstarted this discussion, actually, was First Soldier, because a little over a month ago, they put in Hellmasker-related items in the game. They put in a face accessory and a back accessory, which is the Hellmasker mask and the chainsaw, respectively. It's honestly pretty cool because it gives us potentially our first look at one of Vincent's limit breaks when it comes to the remake project, because we've talked about in the past about these shared assets between games. We looked at, like, the tribal outfit that's in First Soldier that is supposed to be the Gi tribe, and that's potentially what our first look at what the Gi tribe is going to look like, maybe once we get to Cosmo Canyon. The random enemies that we could fight throughout the Cave of Gi, but also Gi Natak at the end, like the helmet that the tribal outfit's wearing is very similar to the headdress and stuff that Gi Natak wears, so stuff like that. There's a lot of cool crossover between First Soldier and Remake, and in the future also with Ever Crisis, once Ever Crisis finally goddamn releases, like we're eventually going to get past where we're at in the Remake/Rebirth story, and we're going to be seeing assets for characters and enemies that we're going to eventually see once we get like the second and third game and shit. And of course, this is only assuming that Vincent will actually have the Hellmasker form when it comes to Rebirth. I'm assuming that he will. He had a very limited move pool, as we talked about in the previous video, so they kind of have to use almost all of those monster forms from the first game. Now, he might not look exactly like this. The mask could be a little bit different. The chainsaw could be a little different, but it gives us a pretty good idea of what he could look like when it comes to Rebirth. Now, the point of this video is discussing the limit breaks themselves and what the lore purpose is for them or why they exist at all, because when it came to the original FF7, he had the 4 different limit breaks, right? The Galleon Beast, Hellmasker, Death Gigas, and Chaos, but there's no lore for them. They were just moves that he used, right? They're just monster forms that he took in the original FF7, and that was it. The thing is, though, as time went on, and we eventually got Dirge of Cerberus, they gave lore purposes for some of his limit breaks, right? The Galleon Beast we don't have very much lore for, but also we don't need a lot of lore for it because it's just a monster form. He was operated on by Hojo, experimented on and shit, so it makes sense that he turned into a monster. Plus, the Galleon Beast looks almost exactly like a behemoth from FF7, so you can kind of explain it away that way. You know, Hojo was experimenting on Vincent, obviously. Maybe he injected him with, like, behemoth DNA, which created the Galleon Beast, or whatever the case, right? You can kind of give it a purpose or a reason. Also, they gave a little bit of lore for it, or so to speak, when it comes to Dirge of Cerberus, where the Galleon Beast form that Vincent takes in that game has an accessory on its chest that resembles the lowercase symbol for Omega, so that obviously connects the Galleon Beast to Chaos and Omega and stuff like that with Dirge of Cerberus, so it gives it even more lore purpose. And obviously when it came to Dirge of Cerberus, Chaos got a lot of lore with the Protomateria stuff, the Tainted Livestream, the Cetro wrote about Chaos on tablets, years and years ago, so they kind of gave it a history that it's kind of always been there, part of the planet. It's attached to Omega, it's a semi-weapon. Whenever Omega activates, Chaos is supposed to kill everybody on the planet and then send them to the Livestream. Omega sucks up the Livestream, flies off into space, etc., right? Like, they give a shit ton of lore for Chaos and a little bit to Galleon Beast. The purpose of this video is, what is the lore in-universe reasons for Vincent's other forms? Like, in-universe, in-lore, why exactly does Vincent turn into Death Gigas, this monster that looks exactly like Frankenstein's monster, right? It probably doesn't need to be explained to most people, but Frankenstein's monster was an amalgamation of old body parts that Dr. Frankenstein dug up from, like, recently deceased, right? Robbing graves and shit, put a bunch of body parts together, and then trying to bring it to life. So why does Vincent turn into that? That's kind of weird, right? And also kind of on the same discussion with Hellmasker. Like, why does Vincent hit a limit break, get angry, whatever, like, the lore purposes is for limit breaks, and he turns into this guy with, like, a hockey mask and a chainsaw? Like, it's cool looking, don't get me wrong, all of his forms are pretty cool looking, but, like, why does he turn into this specifically? Was, like, Hojo just fucking with him, just seeing what he could do, like, kind of make him turn into this guy with a chainsaw? Like, I don't know, it's kind of strange, right? That's why I'm not sure if, like, some of these forms are going to be a part of Rebirth. Now, again, I do think that they're probably going to be using these other forms just because Vincent doesn't have, like, a bigger move pool like the other characters had in FF7. But I say it also because, like, Dirge of Cerberus opted not to use Hellmasker or Death Gigas. They only used Galleon Beast and then, like, Chaos at the end of the game, right? So there's got to be kind of a reason they skipped those. That being said, however, they did give Vincent his Hellmasker form and his Death Gigas form in Dissidia, which is pretty cool. I actually kind of forgot about that. I haven't played Dissidia in a very long time. And while Dissidia is obviously a spin-off Final Fantasy game, it did still come out after Dirge of Cerberus, and it is them acknowledging those other forms of Vincent, so decent chance they're going to be in Remake. I'm just wondering if Remake is going to give a lore purpose to those other forms, or even brand new forms. That's something that's also a possibility as well, is that Vincent, they might not do Death Gigas and Hellmasker, they could just do brand new forms for him, and what that could be is very hard to say. And even if it's not like an in-game explanation, maybe like an Ultimania can tell us why exactly Vincent turns into like a hockey mask chainsaw-wielding guy, or Giant Frankenstein's monster. Like, I just kind of curious about that, because they gave lore purposes for half of his limit breaks from the original FF7, so you kind of got to give lore purposes to the other ones as well. Like, for him to turn into a Frankenstein's monster would have to kind of mean that, like, maybe those types of movies exist in this universe, and maybe Hojo was just like, fuck it. Let's see if I can accomplish that as well. Let's see if I can become God as well, like Dr. Frankenstein. That could be a way you could explain it away from TV shows and movies, because I was also told on Twitter that, like, Hellmasker is kind of modeled after slasher movies, which is actually makes a lot of sense. You have the hockey mask, like Jason from Friday the 13th. You have the chainsaw, like Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's an observation I never really noticed, so maybe that's kind of the explanation for these, in terms of, like, in-universe. Obviously, from the development standpoint, that's what they're based off of. But maybe, like, in-universe, also, they have these types of movies. It's a bit of a weird discussion video, but sort of the TLDR on it is that I just kind of hope they give us explanations, or even, like, lore purposes for why these forms exist. At the very least, an Ultimania would have to, like in Vincent's section of the Rebirth Ultimania, that have his character profile and then whatever his limit breaks would be, and they'd probably have to give some sort of brief description for this shit, because we kind of have nothing for those two. I was asked a while back when talking about this on Twitter what my thoughts would be on, like, newer forms for Vincent, and again, that's hard to speculate, because I don't know. But if we're following, like, the horror movie tropes that he seems to follow with the original FF7, he already sort of looks like and kind of acts like a vampire, right, as we talked about in previous videos. Also, he comes out of a damn coffin in FF7, floats up into the sky and shit. He already turns into a Frankenstein's monster. So if we're pulling from more monster forms from that sort of era of horror movies back in the day, there's still the mummy. Like, I don't know how cool mummy form would be for Vincent, but that's an option. You can consider a werewolf, but also, if you look at the Gallian Beast from Dead to Cerberus, it looks a lot like a werewolf. It looks very different from the, like, kind of behemoth form that it had in the original FF7. So I don't know if they would go the route of werewolf. You also have, like, the creature from the Black Lagoon. That could be kind of cool, kind of an aquatic sort of monster thing for Vincent. That'd be a little bit different. Also consider maybe something along the lines of, like, a Grim Reaper type form. And the only reason I say this is because Vincent's original concept art had him wielding a scythe as a weapon. And I think it'd be kind of cool if he had a form that he wielded a scythe, kind of like a callback to that initial design for the character. Then again, they could also have Vincent rocking, like, scythe melee weapons when it comes to Rebirth. Kind of like how Barrett also is a ranged character but has melee weapons. That could be Vincent's melee weapon. I don't know. But that's pretty much the video, my dude. So, of course, I want to pass off to you guys. So, when it comes to Vincent's other forms that we know of so far, Death Gigas, Hellmasker, what is your in-universe reason for those things to exist? We obviously have what their purposes are from, like, a creative perspective, what they're based off of in our world. But, like, in-universe for FF7, Gaia, Midgar, all that other shit, why does Vincent turn into those things? And are those even going to be a part of Rebirth? What are your thoughts on that? Would they even use those forms? Or would they just make some brand new forms for Vincent? My dudes, that is going to be the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys want to know more Final Fantasy VII Remake / Rebirth Vincent conversation, talk, limit breaks, moves, whatever we talk about with Vincent going forward. Turn notifications, follow me through YT. I'm a Discord. Links for the networks are in the description. Into the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.